So we are now live on Facebook. So again, I am so sorry, everybody. We have had some pretty fun tech issues and I've had some internet connectivity and I know we had some audio issues. So we're going to start this again from scratch. So my apologies. Again, I'll do a quick little introduction. So my name is Orlando Burgoyne. I'm the provincial lead for the Special Needs and Inclusion Program. Thank you again for joining us today. Today we are going to talk about attention and focus, and in particular, some tips and tricks on some fidgets as well. So we have our lovely Nadine Thomas here, who is a registered occupational therapist and is so patient with me in this that she's willing to do this all over again and start from scratch. So without further ado, Nadine, I will pass it off to you, and by all means, you are now the star.
Sounds good. Thanks, Orlando. Oh, I'm getting some feedback. Oh, there we go. So yes, good evening, everyone. And we are talking about attention and focus, and we're going to have some chats about fidgets. I'm Nadine Thomas. I am an occupational therapist, currently working in Ontario, but I'm originally from Nova Scotia. I'm predominantly working in pediatric populations right now, both in schools and privately. So overview of what we're going to have a chat about today is talking about the definitions and just understanding what attention means and the pieces that you might hear, the impact of environments and external impacts, fidgets, that hot topic, and then some other strategies and tools to support attention. So first we have some definitions. So these are just common terms that we often hear about when we're talking about children and attention. You'll hear it from your professionals or your teachers, things like that. So attention is that act or state of attending. So that overall attention piece. Focus is the subject or that is being discussed or studied. So focusing in that attention. So that specific piece. Engaging or engagement is holding the attention or to induce to participate. And concentration, the act or action of concentrating as a directing of the attention or the mental faculties toward a single object. So these are all just different terms and words that you might hear. So there are 4 key types of attention. First, we have divided attention. So this is when we try to pay attention to 2 things at once. We can't technically pay attention to 2 things at once, but we can bounce back and forth very quickly. When we're using different senses, it actually is a little bit easier. So for example, when we're talking on the phone and we're pacing, we're tidying up the house, because we're all guilty of that one, or at least I am. Selective attention, this is when we hyper focus in on one feature or item in the environment or the topic and miss the rest of everything that's happening around us. So for example, when you're in a busy restaurant, you're sitting with the people that you're with, you're focusing in on that conversation, and you're missing the surrounding and other conversations that are happening around you. This is a choice that is made for the person to focus in on that person who is talking. Some people who have difficulty with selective attention are the ones that miss the conversation they're with, and they're hearing that side conversation. They're getting more of that information than their own. Sustained attention. So this is when we are continuously focusing on one thing happening and holding it over time, rather than losing focus and having to bring it back. So for example, good examples of sustained attention could be people who listen to a full album, that like to listen to music, people who paint, people who can sit and complete an entire task or assignment in one sitting. Executive attention, so one that's a little bit trickier and takes longer to learn. This is being able to filter out unimportant information or features of the environment and focusing in on what's most important. This one is not just there, and it takes a long time to learn, and it is learned over the lifespan. So children have a lot of trouble with this, but this is what they learn and they practice throughout school. And it's one of those things that we tend to hit our peak around that age of 25 to 30. So that can be being able to create goals and monitoring that progress, being able to break down a project and continuously come back and work on it, but always know where you are. So that's the executive attention. So why is attention important? So talking about those previous types, those 4 types of attention I talked about, they all intertwine. to support our ability to obtain and retain information. So the selective attention is our choice to listen to that information. Our executive attention allows us to screen out all the other irrelevant information and gather the information that we want and we need. The sustained attention allows us to attend for a period of time and to be able to retain and practice that information. And then finally, divided may or may not be applicable in this scenario. But for example, myself right now, I'm talking and doing this webinar, but also keeping track of time to keep myself on schedule. So to be successful in attention, there are a number of different pieces that have to be addressed to be able to achieve success with attention. So the first one there is sensory processing. This is how our nervous system regulates, organizes, and prioritizes all of that sensory information and input that is coming into our body. A well-modulated nervous system, so one that works really, really well, adapts and changes for the environment that it's in. It has the appropriate arousal level and attention for the task at hand, being able to block out and finding that relevant stimulation and information, and responds appropriately to the specific event. Executive functioning is a huge piece, and it takes a long time to learn. Similar to the executive attention, it just takes learning and practice and exposure and over time. So some of those aspects of executive functioning are genetic, but they will still need to be practiced and learned through opportunities. So executive functioning is a huge piece, and it covers your emotional control, the cognitive flexibility, which is your ability to adapt to changing conditions, goal-directed perseverance, metacognition, which is that ability to take a bird's eye view on yourself in a specific situation, which is good for self-monitoring, self-evaluating. Our organization skills, planning and prioritization, our response inhibition, so which is the capacity to think before you act, sustained attention, task initiation, time management, and that working memory. It's all part of executive functioning. So those are things that we need to think about when we're trying to tackle attention, because we'll need to do those first. Self-regulation. So we all go through different zones of regulation or emotions and feelings throughout the day. It is always important to note and remember that all of these zones are good. So that means like you're happy, are sad, are low, are excited. Those are good feelings and we will fluctuate through them, but it's how self-regulation is how we handle it and how our bodies, how we can support our bodies to move on and get to that ready to learn state and being able to do what we need to do. Then we have our receptive language. So being able to understand what is being said and expressed towards us. Our auditory processing, so it is our hearing actually getting to the brain and getting that information correctly. Hearing, can we physically hear what is being told to us? Motivation, so do we want to? That's a tricky one for most of us, but for kids, learning to have to learn what we don't want to learn. So it might not be plain and it might not be fun, but trying to find some way to motivate them to get through those tasks that they need to do every day. The environment has a huge impact on our attention, and learned helplessness tendencies. So this is a hard one. And often we want to support and we want to help people and we want to be there for them, but we have to be careful of the learned helplessness and that they don't become reliant on the help that we're providing. So knowing when to pull back and give some independence. So how do I know if there are attention difficulties? So if a child is having difficulties with attention, they might, or you might see that they are not attending to a task when you're asked, or when they are asked to. So you might see them looking around the room and not engaged, unable to actually get started or initiate a task. You might see that they miss details in the instructions. So the task might be participated in, but not fully completed. You might see them repeatedly making the same mistakes because they didn't learn earlier from the same attention difficulties they were having. So they keep doing the same thing over and over again. Unable to listen to all the information presented it might just be too much for them to take in, and it's overwhelming. So you might lose them after a few steps, but because it was so overwhelming, they just miss everything altogether because they were trying so hard to focus and figure out what's happening. Find it physically difficult to calm down because they're moving around too much and they're too physically active, or the complete opposite, difficult to wake their bodies up and be stimulated and not able to attend to the information because they might actually appear that they're sleepy or lethargic. And then begins a task, but then gets distracted. This is a pretty common one. So they get started and then they see something else that's happening around them and can't come back to that task to finish it. So this shows that maybe there was too much information for them to sustain over time, and maybe that should have been broken up into some smaller pieces. So can a problem with attention impact other areas? Absolutely. A child who has difficulty with attention, you're probably going to see difficulties in the areas of learning a new skill. So they don't have that ability to learn it in the first place, then repeat it, practice it, and retain that skill. They may miss lots of pieces or become distracted. There's a lot of factors in there. This is one I think is really important, like positive and successful peer interactions and relationships. Children want attention and they want back and forth communication, even with their peers. When there's a difficulty in attention with one of the peers, you might not see the reciprocal interaction. And this can be seen as a betrayal or a dislike between kids. And that problem with attention might actually impact some friendships. Building on play skills is similar to the learning. If others are playing and creating new rules and trying to make new play skills and imagination and things like that, the child with attention difficulties might miss the cue and not build the play skills in the same way, and then they kind of differ from their peers. The auditory processing, so being able to successfully understand their verbal instructions, and ability to follow the group successfully. So when attention is limited, children may miss cues that are presented within the group, such as the instructions or knowing that it's time to get things out for lunch, and they just might set themselves apart from the group or might seem different because they're not following to the same degree. So external impacts. These are things that can impact one's attention that are outside of the child themselves. So the time of day, this can impact one's attention, and it's something that doesn't disappear. The day keeps going, and this is something that we have to think about all the time. So this can actually still be accommodated for and modified for. With the time of day, we want to consider fatigue levels specific to that time of day. So how much focus was required prior to the current time you're at. So if we're just getting home from school, you might see a decrease in attention because after school, they just spent so many hours trying to focus and pay attention and to use all those skills. So when they get home, they're just exhausted or need a little bit of a break. First thing in the morning can be difficult because they're trying to wake up and get stimulated. So you might see that lack of attention at that time or right before bedtime. So similar to that after school, a long day, you just might see that they lose those pieces of attention. So when considering environmental impacts or the physical environments, this can include things like home or school or going to sports or activities, and the demands in each of those environments differ. So often children will associate an environment or a space with the expectations. And when a child has a rigid thinking like that, it can be very difficult for them to switch the demands or their attention in certain environments. So for example, some kids associate home with being play and that love and the cuddles from parents. So their attention might be reduced when comparing to school when they have that expectation. I have to sit here, I have to learn, and I have to do things. But that is all with the rigid thinking. Auditory inputs, so noise and sounds can be a huge factor for a lot of kids, but not all kids are the same. Some kids need that no noise. They're so impacted by noise. So they need that complete silence. They're using their noise reducing headphones. They have to use alternate spaces to be able to support their ability to complete or attend to a task, whereas some actually do better with noise. A busy classroom environment can actually be really good for someone. They use that as a block out, a background noise. So using white noise or instrumental music might be a good help for some kids. So you want to be with the noise and the music, you want to be mindful of what you're using when it's the early years. So try to avoid words and catchy tunes, because that might actually be more of an avoidance technique for some kids. But that's just a little tidbit of information. So overall, auditory impacts have very different impact from one person to another. And it's important to remember that everyone has a different preference. We all have what helps us and what hinders us. And it's just important to reflect that. So routines are a tool that can support to accommodate and modify for these inevitable external impacts. Routines can be difficult to start and then sustain over time, but they can be a huge benefit to parents and caregivers because it can help lessen the expectation of these external factors, the time of day, the physical environment, etc., by replacing them with the expectation of what's next or what's coming. So knowing when they have that expectation, I know once I'm done this, I can have time to play or relax, and using that as a motivation to get the attention first, and then they can have what they want in the end. Visual distractors. So young children are more susceptible to distractors, and as they get older, they are more likely to increase their efficiency and flexibility to allocate their attention to the more desired and required information. Younger children often are seen to want lots of colors and objects, making a room inviting or enjoyable. But we want to think about, is that best suited for the child? Because research actually states that children in high visual distraction environments attend more to the environment around them and are more likely to spend time off task than on the task at hand. So when there is low visually distracting spaces, time on task research has stated that it is increased, and subsequently a correlation was noted with learning, with the learning assessment scoring higher. So the study by Godwin and Fisher suggests that time off task corresponds with the learning outcomes. So due to the nature of environments, a correlation with that visual stimulation or the things we see around us is anticipated to impact learning outcomes, and that distractions and that time off task. So when we're looking at the two pictures on the screen, we have one with lots of artwork shown and colors, and the chairs are pretty and there's things on the desk, but this can just be too much for a child. So they could walk into this and not be able to hear a thing or be able to attend to any task because they're so distracted by the things around them. Where the other room with the colorful carpet has a little bit of color, but it uses a lot of neutral tones to reduce those distractors. So it's not saying that we have to be in a blank room with nothing around us, but it's just making that choice appropriately to support that attention. So fidgets, the hot topic in many schools and at home. So fidgeting, we all do it. Fidgeting is a natural means of our body, or is a natural means of sharpening our focus. Our body will do this without us knowing. You may shake your foot, shift in your seat, wiggle a pen, readjust your hair. I talk with my hands nonstop, but those are ways that we all fidget. And some of us, we might not be conscious of it or not. Some fidgeting, some means of fidgeting is more noticeable than others. This isn't something that should be punished, but we need to embrace the fidgeting in a meaningful way to continue to maintain that focus. So we don't want the fidgeting to be distractive, but we want to use it in a meaningful and productive manner. Most research is completed with students with ADHD, which has found that students with ADHD fidget more than typically developing children. But ADHD is recognized by low levels of some neurotransmitters in the brain. So that's our dopamine and our norepinephrine. And traditional medicines for ADHD provide these chemicals to the child to supplement for those low levels and help children concentrate. That will differ from one child to the next. That's why doctors say, like, oh, we have to do trial and error. We have to give this one a try, because it's different levels of these chemicals to figure out what is needed for your child. So naturally, physical activity, including fidgeting, has the ability to increase the levels of the dopamine and the norepinephrine, which helps children with ADHD concentrate better and improve their cognitive performance. So using intentional fidgeting can enhance academic performance for children with ADHD, as well as those with sensory processing difficulties. The research states that for children with ADHD, using a sense that is other than the one that is used for learning, that is key, it can enhance academic performance. So meaning a child can use a fidget in their hands while they are listening. So using those two different senses to the teacher, that can be a productive and intentional way of using a fidget. So for children with sensory processing differences and may require more sensory input, you can use that to increase the input with it's another opportunity with fidgeting to increase that input for them, supporting their ability to concentrate. It's also fidgeting can help teens who have behavioral or emotional problems or difficulties, because they use fidgeting to better understand themselves and their senses and how their body works. And it actually gives them more information on how their body can calm down and can control those impulses. However, that saying, most of this research is done on these very specific populations, as it's a primary concern or marker within that population or of that diagnosis. But they do that so that we can generalize and extrapolate to other typically developing children who might have mild symptoms or just need a little bit of support. But this gives us that solid research in behind to give us some tools to start. What makes a good fidget? And not all of them are great. So just because it's trendy and fun does not make it a good fidget. Aspects that do make up a good fidget tool include they're quiet and safe, and they can use on their own. Used without looking. Attention should be maintained. That's the whole point of intentional fidgeting. So they shouldn't be having to stare at it and look at it as they're playing with it. That's a big concern, is that it's play versus intentional use. So small enough that it can be used in their lap or in their desk, that's out of the view of others, because that reduces distraction of themselves and also the distraction of other students. Meets their sensory needs or preferences of a child. Some students avoid, seek, some have little preference. So just keeping that in mind as well. Fits their motor skills, meaning they have the physical strength and coordination to use the tool, because some of them are complicated and they don't make sense to all of us, and just keeping that in mind so that it's not a frustrating activity. Cheap, more expensive, might be more durable, but often kids misplace fidgets, and therefore cheap is usually better. That's my preference. Using fidgets appropriately. So some fidgeting is productive and others is disrupting and distracting to that child or them or people around them. So when using fidgets, it's very important to set ground rules, whether it's in your classroom or with your kids, and having some guiding principles to help best manage the use of fidgets, and not just saying, oh, here's a fidget that's going to help you, and that gets the most out of it. So some like potential rules or guidelines could be fidgets are only to be used during listening activities and are to be used to make you feel calm and focused. It's not to play. Fidgets are used to be used in your hands, not thrown in the air, not dropped, tossed, or bounced. Fidgets are for you and you only, not to be shared with any of your friends or classmates, and should not interfere or distract you or others. When you don't need the fidget, put it away. Put it in a place out of sight in your desk or a separate bin in your classroom. And when you have them out, you only need one. So choosing one for that time in that lesson is all that you need. So fidget examples, poppets, these can be a little noisy and distracting, so that's something to keep in mind. But stress balls, putty, which is like a strong Play-Doh to work on. It can also gain strength in the hands. Bouncy bands for the feet, chewies, fidget foot rollers, so they're like little balls that kids can roll their feet on, and infinity cubes. They are nonstop moving for the hands. And so there's no right or wrong fidget, and not one's going to solve a problem. So you want to stick with what your child likes, because their interest in it will increase the likelihood of use and better support the attention in the classroom. So other ways that we can help attention. So physical activity and ADHD. So as we previously talked about, physical activity can help both boost that norepinephrine and that dopamine. And research has demonstrated that after physical exercise, young people with ADHD have comparable concentration levels to those who are not diagnosed with ADHD. And this is consistent and continues across the lifespan, where research shows that physical activity continues to support concentration levels as an adult. And that can be for, like I said, people who are not diagnosed with ADHD. It can also be a tool that might help you, like doing a quick workout before work could help your attention and efficiency throughout the workday. For children with high attentional needs, something a little more consistent. So pedaling, walking treadmills while they're focusing may be the activity that is required to support their attention. So that more consistent movement. For lower attentional needs, it could be having breaks from the sedentary behavior or to increase the time of focus. So if they're having a long chunk of learning time or a long time that they have to attend, just taking like 5 minutes here and there to get them moving before coming back could be sufficient. Physical activities you can use: walking, running, pedaling, jumping, push-ups, squats. And those heavier activities can also have an impact on self-regulation. So having that calming factor as well to help them think clearly and reduce any frustrations or behaviors. How to improve attention. So like at home or even at school, your child might be looking just to get your attention, and when you're not fully present. So you want to be present when you're interacting. You want to make eye contact, give them time, and model what you want to see in them. Children can really sense when you're distracted. This is the same in the classroom. And they can see when your attention is somewhere else and that you're not fully paying attention to them. And when they get the attention they crave, you might be able to get their attention in return. Breaking down the task. Some and most activities can be too overwhelming. So when they're presented as a whole. So breaking a task down in smaller pieces can make it less overwhelming and support their ability to do one step at a time and work through it. When it's less overwhelming, they feel more confident because they were able to succeed and be independent, and then attention usually is supported as well. Make repetitive everyday tasks more exciting. Change up how the activity is presented, or use multisensory tools to practice, retain, and maintain their attention. Use your creative juices to help keep them motivated, which will also help the attention to task. Like I said, physical activity, we know this is a supporter of attention, as it supports the development of required hormones, it gets our energy out, and it naturally enhances our attention. Practice. So actually practicing our attention skills. Activities that require concentration will help develop their attention skills over time, and can help be generalized across tasks or across environments. So puzzles, cooking with following recipes, going for a walk and pointing out the birds or the things that we are seeing, doing word searches. These are all examples of activities that will require concentration and can help continuously build our attention skills. Monitoring hunger and fatigue. It's hard for anyone to concentrate and pay attention on an empty stomach or when they're tired. So try to implement a consistent bedtime and bedtime routine to help with the fatigue. Reach out to your doctor if sleep is an issue. With hunger, try to start off each day with a good breakfast. Most schools, I know the the breakfast programs aren't really going, but there's usually a snack bin available in the classroom, and your child can ask for other snacks. And you can reach out to your school team as well, just highlight, oh, they might need a snack that morning, so that they can offer it and do it maybe a little more discreetly if that's what's needed, just to keep them from sticking out in class or looking different from their peers. And praise the effort, not just the end results. This will allow your child to continue to have confidence in their effort and being able to try and try again, because it takes the pressure off of not achieving the end, and focuses on that process to keep that confidence in their abilities. So tools to support attention. So we're addressing those building blocks. So as we mentioned earlier, there are a number of underlying skills that are needed for a child to be able to successfully work on those attention skills. Those were the sensory processing, executive functioning, self-regulation, receptive language, auditory processing, hearing, motivation, environments, learned helplessness tendencies. So also one of the building blocks, but addressing the environment is very important and super easy. So when your child is looking around a lot, they may be distracted by the environment visually. So you want to, although we want things to look pretty and colorful and inviting, this can be too much for them, and do the opposite. So you can have them sit, if it's at home and they're doing homework, like have them face towards the wall rather than face towards everyone else. Thinking about the lights, is the lights too bright or the lights too dim? Using a poster board during tests, like the presentation boards, they can just pop those up to reduce some visual distractors. And this can work at both at home and at school. Noise is an environmental impact that always should be accommodated for. So I discussed this earlier, and it will vary from one child to the next. And just because a child needs auditory support doesn't mean get rid of the noise. It just means think about it. Some might need it eliminated and some might need it added. And it will just depend from one child to the next. Most children process and understand information differently. So how are we presenting the information? Ensuring that it's presented in a way that they understand. Thinking about visuals, verbal instructions, gestures, how much information is being presented at once, kinesthetic learning, all of those things. So just having those considered. The amount, or the multi-step for single step. So you can present one instruction at a time. You can use a checklist. You can use simple language first, then, all to support how those instructions are being presented. Using play. So play and interest is a motivating tool. Using an interest works to get all of our attention and our motivation to do something. So for example, when we're working on our pre-printing skills and we don't want to draw circles and lines and things like that, if a child's interested in cars, we're drawing roads, we're drawing maps, we're taking our cars all over it. If they like animals, we're drawing their food dishes and their beds, and using play can be a way just to improve and work on all those listening skills, our sustained attention, our executive attention, to be able to work on those underlying skills while still just playing. The play is led by the adults, and you're intentionally thinking about what we're trying to practice, and what skills were desired. So finally, what if the tools don't work? The tools and strategies that we've reviewed can help, but they might not be the only answer. So it is important to know when it's time to seek help from others. So other people you can talk to is your doctor. You can actually get, like if you're in the school or privately, you can call your local OT for an assessment, because they can assess the specific needs of the child and make recommendations that work for them. But there is no one right answer for everyone. And it takes time and trial and error to find the best fit. And yeah, thank you so much.
So actually, we have a couple of questions for you. So one question I've got is, how can I help my 9-year-old to focus on her schoolwork?
If it's at home, so just start thinking about stop thinking about attention and start thinking about the things around them. So is it that they're getting distracted by the environment? Is it that they're getting distracted by noise? Breaking it up. So sometimes they're coming home and it's just like they're exhausted, but we still have homework to do. So we're doing it in those little pieces at a time. Break it up with some movement. So we do 10 minutes, then we take a break, or we do so many questions, and give that expectation while still giving a break, because it might be that once they get home, they're done. So working on finding a routine that will work for them at home.
Perfect. And tips for getting the school to allow for tools, because we have a few families that are having some struggles with the schools allowing for fidgets. So any feedback on that would be beneficial.
One loaded question. And I understand it completely, because there definitely is teachers or schools that will have some pushback. Maybe not overwhelming them with like, don't send a whole bunch of fidgets to school, send one at a time. Try and open a conversation with the teacher, find out why they're not allowing it, because sometimes kids get to school and they're like throwing the fidget across the room and families don't know about that. So just trying to open that conversation to figure out why, so that you can give your side of things, I think is the most important, like trying to advocate. And then if not, try and get in touch with the OT at the school, whether they're on the caseload or not. See if there's someone at the school that can advocate, get the OT involved, and they can help out as well.
Could this perhaps be something that if a child doesn't have a diagnosis or is not identified through the school that may need a fidget, maybe this is something being put into play, and that's, trying to get that into play now before they go down that road? Would that possibly be something where a teacher might not be as open to it if they don't have that paperwork yet?
Yes, but it doesn't mean that they need to have the diagnosis to be able to use a fidget. That is not at all what fidgets are used for. I know it's historically, it is a learning curve for schools and teachers, but it's just opening that conversation that they are just having trouble with attention. And this is what we have seen as something that helps them, because they don't need a diagnosis.
Okay. And another one that I've got is, when may it be time to take away a fidget?
If it's like those guidelines and those rules that you set out, then yeah, I would definitely say taking it away. If they're not following it and using it appropriately and it's not intentional and it's more of that play, it's time to take it away. It doesn't mean it can't be reintroduced, but having those expectations set is kind of a good factor to think about.
If you were to pick their top 3 go-to fidgets for somebody to start out with, what would they be?
I love the infinity cubes. They are mindless. Just Google them. They don't stop, and you really don't have to look at them. I like those a lot. I like Theraputty. That can be a little bit distracting, but if you do it in smaller doses, because it's always moving, it's nice and strong. It doesn't get stuck to things like some other objects. And then I just really like stress balls.
Okay. What would be your top 3 fidgets that you would say to avoid unless, they are for a specific need? Anything in particular?
Poppets, they're trendy now.
Okay.
So those are definitely one to be careful of. Rubik's cubes are starting to become a thing, and those are visually distracting. So those would be ones to avoid. Those would be the only 2 that I'd really notice.
So we will actually be posting the link in a YouTube video on the infinity cubes. So we will be having that available for families as well. And I'll also add that link to this too. Nadine, do you have any other pieces, last thoughts that you would like to share with our families?
I think the biggest thing is that attention is tricky, and we all have pieces of attention that we are not perfect on, and we never will be, but it's how you accommodate and you modify, because it's going to be inevitable, and it's just how we cope with things. So it's okay to not be the best and the perfect at attention, but just know that there's tools to help you out there.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you, Nadine, again for tonight. And again, apologies for the tech issues. So thank you for being patient with us. Thank you everybody for joining us and sticking it out. We greatly appreciate it. Nadine, just give me 1 second. I'm just going to sign off on here and then we are good to go. So again, thank you, everybody. Have a great night and thanks for joining. This will also be recorded and posted. So for those of you that did have some issues or frankly lost some patience with us, I can't blame you, then you can watch this at a later date and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks again, Nadine. We appreciate it.
Thanks.